In the first para, the writer tells us how he accidentally fell into the company of half a dozen gentlemen who were engaged in a warm debate about some political affair. The writer goes on to say that they discussed a variety of topics, and while discussing a multiplicity of other topics, they took occasion to talk of the different characters or traits of the several nations of or countries of Europe. While they were discussing the different characters of the several nations of Europe, one of the gentlemen, assuming that he was the most intelligent, or feeling that or believing that he had possessed all the merit of the English nation in his own personality, started criticizing other European countries like Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Spain. In the same breath, he praised his own country, that is England, to the sky by saying that in bravery, generosity, clemency, and in every other virtue, English are the best in the world. So he criticizes the Dutch by saying that they are highly avaricious. He criticizes the French by saying that they are a set of sycophants. He condemns the Germans by saying that they are drunken sorts of and beastly gluttons. The English gentleman criticizes the Spaniards by calling them proud, haughty, and surly tyrants. So he attributes many vices to other European countries, but he has got only good things to or great things to say about his own country. Next paragraph. This very learned and judicious remark was received with a general smile of approbation by all the company. He thinks that he made a learned means scholarly, and judicious, highly sensible remark was received with a general smile of approbation. Approbation, approval. So the man thinks that he has made a highly learned and judicious remark about the European countries. And this was supported by everybody in the group. So there were six in the beginning. So all the five supported what he said. But there was one dissenting voice there in the company. Whose voice was that? That is the writer's voice. So the writer says that it was supported by all, but means except your humble servant, that is me. So the writer says that except this humble servant, he is talking about himself, he is referring to himself, and he says, except himself, everybody in the group supported what the gentleman said about other European countries and England. Who, he talks about himself, the writer talks about himself, who endeavoring to keep my gravity as well as I could. So the writer tries to keep his seriousness as well as he could when everybody else expressed their approval. When everybody in the group supported what the gentleman said about the different European countries, the writer alone tried to keep his gravity seriousness as best as he could, as well as he could. So how does he try to keep his gravity? By reclining, resting, my head upon my arm, continued for some time in a posture of affected thoughtfulness. So how does a writer try to keep his seriousness or gravity? by resting his head upon his arm and continuing in a posture of affected thoughtfulness. What is affected? Put on, pretended, not genuine, not real, artificial. So the writer gave an impression that he was thinking very, very seriously about something. The writer was not thinking about anything else. The writer was worried just about what the gentleman has said, but he gave an impression that he was deeply involved in thinking about something profound. Why does he do this? He does this because he did not want to express his approval of what the gentleman has said. As if I had been musing on something else. So he rests his head upon his arm and continues in a posture of affected thoughtfulness as if he had been musing on something else. Musing, thinking about something else. So anybody in the group would think that the writer is seriously thinking about something profound, but he was not actually doing it. The writer gave the impression that he was seriously thinking about something because he did not want to smile. He did not want to give a smile of approbation, supporting what the gentleman has said. And I did not seem to attend to the subject of conversation. So when the gentleman made the statement, everybody except the writer congratulated him on his wonderful, judicious, scholarly remarks. But the writer alone chose to keep quiet. The writer alone did not give a smile of approbation. He continued to be thinking about something else. At least he gave an impression that he was thinking about something else. And I did not seem to attend to the subject of the conversation. So I gave an impression that I was not attending to, I was not involved in the subject of conversation. I did this because I did not want to disappoint the young gentleman who criticized other European countries but praised his own country, that is England. And the writer put on a posture of thoughtfulness because he did not want to offend the young man by telling him on the face that he was wrong in his remarks. He didn't want to do that. He knew that he would be angry or he would be offended, he would be hurt if he told him that he did not agree with what he was saying. So hoping by all these means, what are the means here? Methods or strategies. What are the strategies here? When everybody else congratulated the young man, the gentleman, on his wonderful remark, the writer reclined his head upon his arm as if he was thinking, he was musing on something else which was very profound. So he wanted to avoid the disagreeable necessity of explaining myself and thereby making somebody lose something. Depriving the gentleman, this is not man, gentleman, of his imaginary happiness. So the writer says that he wanted to avoid the disagreeable, unpleasant necessity of explaining himself. Suppose he listened to the conversation, suppose he involved himself in the conversation, then he should tell the young gentleman that he did not agree with what he was saying. He had to give an explanation for his disagreement. And he knew very well that if he expressed disapproval, the man would be offended, the man would feel bad, and he would lose his imaginary happiness. Now the gentleman is living in a world of happiness, imaginary happiness. Why does he feel happy? He feels happy because everybody in the group supported what he said, endorsed what he said. So he is enjoying, he is savoring the happiness that he has got now. And the writer keeps quiet because he doesn't want him to lose this imaginary happiness. Next paragraph. But my pseudo patriot had no mind to let me escape so easily. So, when everybody else congratulated the gentleman, the writer tried to keep himself away from the discussion. How does he do that? He does this by pretending to be seriously thinking about something. But the pseudo patriot, what is pseudo? Not genuine, not real, false. Now the writer calls this English gentleman a pseudo patriot. Pseudo patriot, not a real patriot. Patriot, one who loves his country. The man praises his own country to the sky. So anybody would think that he is a real patriot, but the writer thinks that he is not a real patriot. He is a pseudo patriot. Why does the writer feel that he is a pseudo patriot? Because he knows that a good patriot will never criticize other countries for no reason. A good patriot, a genuine patriot, will praise his own country, no doubt. At the same time, he will praise even other countries when they achieve something great. He will never, a true patriot will never make sweeping generalizations about other countries. He may praise his own country, but he will never blindly criticize all the other countries by attributing all vices to them. He will never do that. Since this gentleman has done it, the writer calls him a pseudo patriot. But my pseudo patriot had no mind to let me escape so easily. I was trying to keep myself away, but the gentleman who made the statement compelled me to join the conversation. But my pseudo patriot did not want me to escape from what was going on so easily, because he wanted even me to give a smile of approbation. In fact, he felt very bad because I did not support what he was saying. When everyone else supported him, I alone kept quiet. So he did not really like this. So he wanted me to tell him what I felt about his remarks. Not satisfied that his opinion should pass without contradiction, he was determined to have it ratified by the suffrage of everyone in the company. Actually, the gentleman should feel very happy because his remarks or his opinions or his views were accepted without any contradiction. Contradiction here, opposition. Everybody in the group supported what he said. I did not like, the writer did not like what he said, but he kept quiet. He never tried to contradict him. But he was not happy. The gentleman was not happy, even though his opinions were passed without contradiction. He was very firm, determined, firm to have his remarks, have his opinions, have his views ratified, validated by the suffrage. Suffrage actually means vote. Here it means support of everyone in the company. So the gentleman wanted everybody in the group to support what he has said. That's why he turned to me and asked me what I thought about his views. For which purpose, addressing himself to me with an air of inexpressible confidence, he asked me if I was not in the same way of thinking. Since I did not give a smile of approbation, he felt bad. So that's why he turned to me and asked me whether I was not in the same way of thinking as others were. So when he criticized many European countries and praised his own country, everybody in the group supported him except me. So when I kept quiet, when I tried to keep myself away from the conversation, what was going on, he wanted me to be involved in the conversation because he was very sure that he was highly confident that I would also endorse what he had said. So he addressed himself to me with an air of inexpressible, great, something which cannot be expressed or described. So great confidence. He was absolutely confident that I would also support what he had just said. So he asked me if I was not in the same way of thinking. Now the writer says that as I am never forward in giving my opinion, especially when I have reason to believe that it will not be agreeable. So usually, I never go forward in giving my opinions to others because I know that most of the times my opinions will not be accepted easily by others. So when I seem to be having different kind of opinions, different kind of arguments about a topic, I choose to keep quiet because I'm very sure that my arguments or my version will not be accepted by others in the group. Even here, I kept quiet, not because I agreed with what he said, I kept quiet because I did not want that young man to be disappointed. That's why I kept quiet. I didn't agree with what he was saying. I was actually angry with him for having made such sweeping generalizations. But I did not want to give my opinions on what he said because I was very sure that he wouldn't accept them very easily. So when I am obliged to give it, I always hold it for a maxim to speak my real sentiments. So left to myself, I would never go forward and give my opinion to anybody. I choose to keep quiet. I choose to keep myself away. But if at all I am asked to give my opinions, I don't keep quiet. I will give my opinions as they are without mincing words, without any hesitation. I will tell the truth. So when I am obliged, when I am asked to give it, when my opinions are sought, I don't keep quiet. I will give my opinions without any hesitation, without mincing words. Very confidently, very courageously, I will put forward my opinions if I am asked to give my opinions. Normally, I don't do that, but if I am asked to give it, when my opinions are sought, I don't keep quiet. I will give my opinions without any hesitation. So I stick on to one maxim. What is a maxim? If I am asked to give my opinions, I will really speak my real sentiments. Sentiments here, views, opinions. So I therefore told him that. Told whom? Told the gentleman who asked me whether I was not sharing the opinions of others. So I therefore told him that for my own part, I should not have ventured to talk in such a peremptory strain. So I told the gentleman that for my own part, if I were in his place, I would not venture here, take the courage to talk in such a conclusive, what is it, peremptory? Peremptory is conclusive, strain, tone. I will never speak in such a conclusive tone unless I have made the tour of Europe and examined the manners of these several nations with great care and accuracy. So, what has a gentleman done here? The gentleman has blindly criticized other European countries and praised his own country as if he knows each and everything about other European countries, other European nations. So I told him, if I were in his place, or for my own part, I will never talk in such a confident way. Why not? Because I am yet to make a tour of Europe and examine or make a thorough study of the manners of the several nations like France, Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, and other countries. So, unless I make a thorough study of the manners of several nations with great care and accuracy, I will never make such conclusive statements. So, even if I say something bad about another country, I'll say that's what I feel. It may be true or may not be true. But I will never speak in such a strain as you have done. I don't know whether you have made a tour of Europe and examined the manners of these several nations with great care and accuracy. I am not sure. I don't know whether you have done it. Still, you are talking in such a peremptory strain. You seem to be criticizing all the European nations by attributing vices to them, and you are praising your own country by attributing only virtues to your country. I don't think this is fair. I don't think it is just. A more impartial judge, if there is a man who is really impartial, unbiased, not prejudiced, impartial judge or a gentleman, he would not hesitate to declare that the Dutch were more careful, frugal, careful in spending money, and they are hardworking. Suppose you ask an impartial judge to give his views on England and other European countries, I am very sure that he would not hesitate to say that the Dutch are more frugal and more hardworking, industrious, hardworking. The Dutch are more frugal and industrious than the English. You cannot say that the Dutch have only vices. You can never say that. The Dutch are known for their frugality and industriousness. Look at the next one. The French, in my opinion, the French are more temperate here, moderate, and polite than the English. So the Dutch are more frugal, are more industrious than the English. The French do have some virtues. What are they? They are more moderate, temperate, are more polite than the English. Now look at the Germans now. The Germans are more hardy, tough, disciplined, and patient of labor and fatigue. Fatigue here, tiresomeness. So the Germans are more hardy, they are more tough, they are more disciplined, and they're known for hard work. And they easily put up with labor and fatigue, unlike the English. The English feel tired so fast. The English feel tired of labor, tired of fatigue. The English feel exhausted within no time, and in comparison, the Germans are more hardy. Look at the Spaniards. The Spaniards are more staid, respectable, and sedate, calm, dignified. So even the Spaniards have their own virtues. What are they? The Spaniards are more respectable and calm, moderate than the English. Even they have their virtues. Who, though undoubtedly brave and generous, but let me tell you, the English, people of England are no doubt very brave and very kind. They are generous. But at the same time, they are very rash, they are very rude, they are very headstrong, they are very proud of themselves, they are very haughty. So they are rash, they are haughty, they are headstrong, they are very proud, they are very arrogant and impetuous. Impetuous, highly impulsive, too apt to be, so they are likely to be, too likely to be elated, overjoyed with the prosperity, and to be desperate, lose a confidence in adversity. Adversity here, misfortune. So, what are the negatives of the English? They have got two positive qualities. Number one, they are very brave. Second one, they are generous. At the same time, they have some vices. What are they? By nature, the English are very rash. They are very haughty. They are very proud of themselves. They are very arrogant, and they are very impetuous. Impetuous, impulsive. They are not very careful in what they do. They take a decision on the spot without thinking about it seriously, so they are bound to make mistakes. And they are too likely to be overjoyed with success, and they are likely to be desperate when they face misfortune. So they are not stoic. Stoic means one who knows how to accept adversity and prosperity in the same way. If somebody feels extremely elated when he gets success, and if he feels extremely desperate when he faces misfortune or adversity, you can't call him great. A man becomes great when he knows how to accept prosperity and adversity in the same way.